So that's a different set of partnerships that has to be created. Any advice for how to create those partnerships, and do you do it in advance? Do you discover them? Is it possible to do it in advance?
Yeah, you have to do it in advance. Okay. There's no question about that. And you have to say, so here's the way this works, right? And so we're going to work in this way. It is a little different than the way you're used to working with us, but bear with us. You know, here's what we need to be successful from you.
So if I'm a project manager or director responsible for, say, director of app development, and I know I'm doing Agile over here, and I know I've got to get the the infrastructure group and the database team and these other silos maybe aligned with me, what would I how would I start that conversation and get that buy-in in advance?
If you're moving from a waterfall methodology to an Agile, you first want to get those partners, even just get them what I'll call a passing set of knowledge about the process itself. So they so it's not this black box of chaos, that they're looking at from the outside, but so they have an understanding there is rigor, there is process, and when we meet with you twice a week or 3 times a week or whatever, we know what's been going on, since the last time we talked, and we have an expectation about what you're going to need from us when we interact, right? I believe that one of the reasons that there's this myth out there about Agile can only work if you're co-located is because location, regardless of type of methodology, has always served people well who maybe didn't do enough planning up front or enough explicit communication about what's the decision-making dynamic and what's the communication dynamic need to be between the teams.
It really, like you're kind of indicating, points to the need with Agile projects, not just the project plan or planning that has the 2-week or 2-month horizon, but the higher level coarse grain plan that encompasses the release and when partners need to deliver. I do have one example for the infrastructure, though. We struggled at my current client, the Gap, for over a year with infrastructure. And by infrastructure, I mean people laying down hardware, people doing the database updates, any sort of infrastructure-related networking and such. And actually, one of the leads of the infrastructure team came to us one day, and he says, our service model just isn't tying in with your development model. You guys are using stories. You pick off the high priority stories, high value stories, you work on them for 2 weeks and they get done. Meanwhile, over here we have a service ticket sort of metaphor for infrastructure where the Agile team submit a ticket and they get back, thanks for ticket 13,780H. One of our team members will be with you momentarily. Call us in 2 weeks if they don't call you. So this infrastructure lead had the idea of what if we just, for all planned project work, not the emergency work of a server went down, but let's face it, most IT projects, you can plan infrastructure needs. You can plan when you're going to do major networking updates, major database schema updates. So all planned project work, why don't we use stories for that? And so they started down that path. Actually, as a consultant, first thing I did was go out to Google and Googled Agile plus infrastructure. And of course, it was, there's no documents matching that criteria. Did you really mean Agile and infrastructure? And so, but after that, we took this story-based approach, and that led to infrastructure teams not just coordinating and being a part of the development team, identifying their stories up front in the project and playing them with the development team, but also having storyboards where they're looking per project what infrastructure stories need to be played, and also looking at the workload of their resources as well. And it's working so well. It's amazing.
So Gene, we've had the same situation. Our centralized infrastructure organization, which in the McGraw-Hill companies has been pulled out and centralized in the corporate parent, they're not Agile. And we haven't gone as far as you have. That sounds wonderful, and we should talk afterwards about how to do that. But we have been able to plan, and we've basically given them product roadmap targets when we need infrastructure available to us. But that's been one of the challenges is, how do you get these external dependency teams who are not part of your Agile team to be ready for you and to not hold up the freight train?
Right. Rarely do I see a win-win scenario, but with infrastructure teams aligning with development teams, it is a win-win. The infrastructure teams love it. They're no longer there late at night getting the call that, tomorrow morning we need a server deployed.
Sure.
Right? So that allows them to manage their work and have a better work-life balance as well.
That's great. That's actually a really important point, is that because it can't be comfortable to be operating the mode there are with a big batch of things and then the last minute rush.
Right.
So,
yesterday we needed 20 resources. Today we need 1. Tomorrow we need 30.
Yeah.
It's very hard to plan resources as well.
Very good. Very good. Okay, so that was actually a good. We went out of sequence in our list, and that was nice and organic. I'd like to come back to just to wrap up the concept of controls and discipline. So it turns out Agile is disciplined, and it is maybe more disciplined and has more rigor, but still, that's kind of at a project and team level, I think, as we described it. So if I put on my PMO hat or my CIO hat, what am I giving up here? Do I have adequate controls of cost and risk? How do I govern my portfolio of projects with all this Agile work going on? Has anything changed? Is it better? Is it worse?
What we're seeing so far is it is definitely an adjustment. It's a different way of looking at it and thinking about it. One of the other things in our transformation program that I'm responsible for is what we call the product model. In short, thinking more about our applications as commercial software products. I'll put that in quotes, right? This is, okay, do you have a long-term roadmap for this thing? Do you know how much your business wants to spend on this piece of technology because it's going to add that much value, in this year or in this period that you're looking at? And so we have found, and we're not at this point where every place that we're doing Agile, we have that product model implemented, or frankly, vice versa. But we've found that where we see the two together, this notion of having a sort of a product level backlog, that the set of things you want to do to your product, to your application, over time, a multi-year functional and technical roadmap, and the investment management process that goes along with that has helped people tremendously get more comfortable with Agile. And Agile's been a natural sort of, okay, great, I'll take the next thing off the product backlog and go get it, way to execute.
Okay.
I don't think we've solved this problem yet, and this is one of the big issues and growth areas for Standard & Poor's and the McGraw-Hill companies, because ultimately for certain size projects we have to report up into our corporate parent. The way it has been is management, finance, governing bodies want to know exactly what you're going to do, by when, for how much. And I think the compromise is you have to do the best you can at the beginning of these larger projects that have this kind of governance layer at estimating, but there has to be a compromise from the PMO to understand that scope is going to change. And you'll stay within the budget, but the date will be a little bit fluid and the scope will be a little bit fluid. It's a challenge that we haven't solved yet. We're now just bringing projects before the governing body for approval, and then at the end of the approval cycle to check whether the benefits, the return on investment has been achieved. We're bringing those at the close of some Agile projects, and it'll be interesting to hear those conversations. Well, we were under budget. I'll give you an example. I have 3 Agile projects going. One is quite mature. We're going tomorrow to this closeout meeting. We're under budget. We stayed within the time frame, but we delivered slightly different. Is that going to be a problem for the governing committee or not? I don't know.
I mean, typically, right? So I think it's a great example. As long as you can get the governing committee to be thinking in terms of, did you get the business benefit that was intended by making this investment?
Right.
Now, you may get it in a slightly different way, but as long as you're getting that benefit, getting them to think about that in that way is important. Because of the nature of IT projects, oftentimes people think differently. They think, okay, all right, as we're tracking progress, well, do we have the requirements done? Do we have the functional design done? You have to get them out of that way of thinking about that's how you understand progress. You should be thinking about, okay, do I have a working piece of software, even if it's for a little piece of the total functionality at the end of this thing? It's a different way of thinking.
Yeah, I think Agile gives you a capability to really streamline and simplify your reporting as well. I mean, in the ideal state, rarely does this happen, but in the ideal state, you really try to fix the resources on an Agile team, and you have a certain amount of time with your budget for that team to operate, so you try to vary scope. Not so much vary as in add more scope, but maybe do the brick in, brick out. Oh, this is more higher priority to you today, well, how about we remove this lower priority thing?
Right.
So we have a very simplistic chart that essentially shows the scope growth and the velocity of the team in meeting that scope. Overlay on that one diagram the business milestones. So it doesn't provide you all the answers, but what it does provide is, do we need to discuss this? Is the next release or the third release in jeopardy given the velocity of the team? So a lot of times having a change-ready team just makes you think differently as well. One example with a current client, they're working on a robotic solution, replacing some of the humans that do the picking of the materials for the online orders with essentially robots that go out and grab the materials and bring it back to a centralized location. And they started this project, we called it the Western Project, because it was designed for a new order fulfillment center on the West Coast. Well, about halfway into the project, about 4 months into it, business decided right now with the economy, it doesn't make sense perhaps to open up that new Western order fulfillment center, but we have this one already established right down the street. It's still kind of Western, but it's only like 20 miles away, not 1,000. And they decided, well, okay, well, we need to stop the Western project and start this other project and have the robots deployed just right down the street. And we went back to them, myself and the CTO, and said, well, instead of a new project, why don't you keep the team in place and just change the stories they're working on? It's the same technology, same application. And they're like, no, I mean, our process is, this is a new project into the portfolio. You still have funding, let's just change the scope. And they finally realized, yeah, let's change the scope. Within a week, had a new batch of stories going to that team, and they delivered early. So another opportunity, to, lastly, real quickly, is I think you really know you're doing Agile well as far as working on those high priority things first, when you can go back to management and say, yeah, this project, we're stopping it. Why? Why are you stopping this project? Well, we've achieved the value we wanted to, and we believe it'd be better to put that team on a higher value project over here. I think that's one kind of indicator that having change-ready teams is actually influencing your portfolio.
Yeah, I agree with that.